You can't replace part of the brain. Like, you
treat them the same.
The source of truth for the MedTech industry.
Coexists with the prophets.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the MedTech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the 90s, built $1 billion company that held up high. A lot of things.
State of MedTech with your host, Omar and Khateeb. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Surgical education is a topic that is, at the forefront of everybody's minds these days, mainly because we have such an influx of new technologies that are changing the way surgery is being practiced, delivered, and even managed. And so for that, I wanted to have my good friend, Dr. Jeremy Gallegos Eckstein, onto the show, who is both a surgeon and entrepreneur, and he sits in a very unique place to talk about the adoption of technology, surgical education and training, and more. Dr. Eckstein is currently the director of general surgery residency at Memorial Regional Hospital down in Florida, and is, of course, a big proponent of robotic surgery, laparoscopic surgery. He's a big believer in laparoscopic surgery, and we, dive into the details around that, especially the impact of robotics on that. But he's also an entrepreneur. He founded a company called Unira, spelled U-N-I-R-A. And Unira is a really interesting company because essentially it's an app with the mission of making residency training easier. What it is a free app for tracking all your surgical activities, and they analyze and improve everything to make it so that it's easier to log your cases and to understand how are you improving, how can you build more competency in certain procedures. Because if you think about it, in residency training, it's actually not very clear. Sometimes, depending on which residency you go to, you might be really good at one specific procedure over another. Here it makes it a lot easier. So if you're a physician, or especially if you're a resident, you can start using the Unira app. You can check it out at unira.io. That's UNIRA.io. If you're a medical device startup and you're wondering, man, how do we find early adopters like Dr. Eckstein without having to spend a lot of money? This is where my company, Khateeb & Co. can help you. What Khateeb & Co. does is that we use our own data sets and social media to help you build commercial pipeline and find early adopters to pack into pipeline, which helps you when it comes to raising money, because every investor wants to see that you have commercial traction. But along that way, we work with you on your messaging and marketing so that as we fill that pipeline, we start identifying who are the key opinion leaders, and more importantly, who are the early adopters that through your technology, they become activated and become raving fans and help drive market adoption. So if you want to learn more about how we can help you to do that, go ahead and book time with you. Go to khateebandco.com or shoot me a message on LinkedIn. So with that being said, let's head on to our episode with Dr. Eckstein. Enjoy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Really excited about this episode because surgical education is something that's ever evolving, especially in the digital age. Though we don't see a lot of innovation in the space, there's one company that I came across called Unira, which focuses on surgical education in a new way. We're joined by their founder, Dr. Jeremy Gallegos Eckstein, who's also a practicing surgeon down in Florida. Dr. Eckstein, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Good, great, Omar. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely, my friend. Excited to have you here. So maybe for the audience who doesn't know you, maybe give a quick intro to yourself and your clinical background before we dive into today's topic.
All right. I was born in New York, so I'm going to start from the beginning. The context. So I was born in New York. My dad, who is also a doctor, was doing his residency in pediatrics. We were originally from Venezuela. I was born during his residency, and then we moved back. And I come from a big family of doctors. So my cousins, my uncles. And so that's what I decided to be. And then when I finished med school in Venezuela, I went and started my training at Mount Sinai in New York as general surgery. And then I moved to Maimonides in Brooklyn to finish my general surgery residency. And then I did my fellowship at the Cleveland Clinic in Florida with Dr. Rosenthal and Dr. Schoenstein. And then I joined a practice. For the past 15 years, I've been working at the Hollywood, Florida Memorial Healthcare System.
That's fantastic. Those names you mentioned, Mount Sinai, are very well-known and respected surgeons. So given that you're a very busy surgeon, how did the concept of Unira come into your mind?
This all started when I was in residency. So I started as a prelim because I wanted to do surgery and I was a foreign grad, or I am a foreign grad. So it's a little bit more difficult for us to get the position. And I remember I had to be there and I had to work my butt off And one day, the program director came out with a project of the ACGME, which is the accrediting body for education in residency and graduate medical education, was implementing what they call the core competencies. So these are 6 things that a physician has to show to deem them capable of being a physician or practicing the craft, right? And so we had the concepts, but we didn't know how to measure it. This was almost 20 years ago. They came out, they didn't know how to measure it. And my program director said, let's see if we can find a way to measure these things. And so I took it very seriously. It's an opportunity to do something to shine, right? Everybody came out with an Excel spreadsheet, and I decided to make a web page. And out of that web page evolved the idea of creating a online presence for physicians, like an e-portfolio. So the company was called ePortfolio MD. So it was designed for residents to put what they did. I was a resident and I was doing all sorts of things all day long. And I felt that I was getting recognized for a very fraction of the things that I was doing. I had no way of logging all the things that I was doing. So I wanted to create this platform, and we did. We created this platform, me with the help of Omar Laguna, which is a surgical oncologist right now. And we happen to work in the same hospital again 20 years later, which is pretty impressive. And we came up with this company, and we were able to have our hospital use it. And we were talking to med schools from the Caribbean to see if we can incorporate it into their curriculum. And then I came to a point where I had to decide if I wanted to be the founder of ePortfolio or I wanted to be a surgeon, because I couldn't do both. It was consuming more and more of my time, more and more of my money. And surgery residency is really intense as it is. And my wife, we just had a newborn. So life was crazy and I was broke. I had no money for anything. Under those circumstances, and because of my love of medicine, I decided to go on that path. So I'm going to be the best surgeon I can be. That's what I'm going to be. But I was always interested in innovation and education and all these things throughout my career. So I always had that little spark in me of the entrepreneurial vein that was asking to come out. When I started having residents of my own, and I became the attending that was teaching them, I saw that they were going through the same problems that I was going through. The same issues with logging of the cases, with documenting their activities. And I saw it as a burden for them because I understand. I went through that burden. You are preoccupied with being the best doctor you can be, and you have to please your patients and please the staff and be a good doctor and be the resident that each particular attending wants. And those are the things that are preoccupying you all the time. And then you have to do this administrative work. So nobody wants to do it. And the way that it was done when I was a resident was being done now that I'm an attending. And I said, nobody did anything. What happened to ePortfolio? What happened with that thing? It never came to fruition. It never came to me. It was a given. This was going to happen. It was unavoidable. If I didn't do it, somebody else was going to. But it didn't happen. And so there was it. That was it. The need that I saw 20 years ago is still present today. And I've been thinking about this for 20 years. And now I have a little bit more time and a little bit more money. So I decided to pursue that I put in the back burner for 20 years.
That's fantastic. And I think sometimes when it comes to being an entrepreneur, a lot of it's just timing. And so sometimes your idea just isn't timed to the right time, whether it's for the market or for yourself, etc. So I really commend you that it's an idea that you had and you came back to revisit it.
Yeah.
So you launched Unira, and for those who are interested, you can check it out at unira.io. That's UNIRA.io. Tell us a little bit about the name, and then more specifically, who is it for and how do you use it?
So the name comes out of the word unidad, which is in Spanish. It's a Spanish word for unite. So that's why it's called UNIRA. And if you look for what it stands for, it is a Unified Repository of Achievements. That's what UNIRA stands for. But the word is also what it means in Spanish. It's an app-based platform that is free to download. And what it does at its current state is capture the most basic activity that any surgery resident does, which is their operative experience. So that's what we're doing right now.
So essentially, it serves as a way to track and document like what a resident does. Because as a resident, you do so many different things. And if you think about it, there's really nothing to show. Like a general surgery resident in, let's say, Memorial down in Florida might have a different case mix than, say, a general surgery resident up in Cook County. And they're going to be exposed to different things. But it's very hard to track what you've done. And then as a result, it's very difficult to also figure out like what your deficiencies are. Is that kind of the foundation of what Unira is?
Yeah, I think that our brains have a very finite capacity to analyze big numbers, right? And also we have a memory capacity. We don't remember too well after a certain amount of time has passed. So if you tell me what is my case mix, I can tell you with a good approximation because it hasn't changed in a very long time. But for a resident, it's difficult to really gauge how much of this, how much of that. And Unira is a way to graphically display what is it that they're doing. So it tells them, look, this is in this category, this is what you're doing, this is how much you've done, and this is how much you need to do to get your certification. And it is very user-friendly and nice to look at. And of course, it's on the phone, so it's very available.
It's fantastic. Tell us a little bit more, like, aside from like residents use this, is there a capacity that attendings can use this? And how would an attending use this?
Yeah, so it's very interesting because the American Board of Surgery just came out with what they call the EPAs, the Entrustable Professional Activities. And what they're trying to achieve is to create a dialogue between the attendings, the teaching surgeons, and the residents, and doing micro evaluations. So the way it works is like this: the resident goes in and does a case with the attending that is supervising. At the end of the case, they put in their entrustability score. So the entrustability score is how much trust you got during this operation. And then that goes to the attending, and the attending puts its own interpretation of the situation. So it's from 1 to 4, 1 being the least amount of trust, 4 being the most amount of trust. You fall somewhere there. And so I, as an attending, can say this person did a 3 level of trust, of entrustability, and then the resident may say I did a level 2. So there's a gap there in communication. But at the end of the day, what you want to see is that there's a trend towards more entrustability as the resident moves along their training. So you want to see a trend, a favorable trend, a positive trend, comparing this resident in day 1 and the same resident in the last day. You want to see that. So now the attending is in the loop. And now, for the first time, there's a new channel of communication between the residents and the attending. And I commemorate the American Board of Surgery for doing this because this channel didn't exist. So this is a new way of communicating. So what we did at Unira is that we integrated the EPAs, which are their own silo over here, with the case log from the ACGME. So these two things were two completely different entities. They are working with the same people, doing the same things, but there's no a good way of them communicating, and that's where Unira comes in. What I did, I fused the EPAs with the CPT codes and the categories of the ACGME, and now every time that the resident is going to log a case, if it qualifies for this evaluation, it shows they can do it, and then the app automatically sends it to the attending and close the loop. And the attending side now also has an app, and that app is following their progress and their case loads and their productivities and their RVU numbers. So now this is adding value to the activity for the attending. So you're making this not a zero-sum game. So everybody should be winning in this equation. So now the attending has something to go out of this interaction because now they have an app that they can use as reference to guide their productivities, where they're making their money, where the volumes are. And so my hopes is that increases attending participation.
That's fantastic. And I think it goes back to the famous saying of Peter Drucker, which is like, what gets measured gets managed. And this is something that for, the history of medicine and surgery was never really measured. And so it's great that you're actually doing this in the way that it's like almost like user generated content, but in this case you have the resident who's putting in their scores and everything, but then the attending has a way to also track their development. So that way you have a two-way system that essentially is ensuring that people are tracking and making things get better and improving. And I'm sure that over the long term, this would also have an improvement on programs, because maybe an attending realizes that based on their case mix, there are certain cases that their residents aren't getting exposure to, and maybe that's a way of improving the program.
Exactly. It's a way of knowing where is our program deficient overall. They can get that data now. They know those numbers, but the thing is that a lot about the data, all the data in the universe exists already. Right? It's just a matter of us knowing how to garnish it. So the data exists over there, but how do you get to that data and how do you interpret that data that already exists? How do you digest it and present it? And I think that is one of the problems, making sense of all those numbers. And that's what we're trying to do. For example, something that is very interesting with this, talking about data. And in nature, we are physicians and we're scientists. And this is all about, for us, it's been all about data with evidence-based medicine. We act based on evidence. So we want to see evidence of things working. So one of the things that is interesting about this EPA is that it gives two impressions of the same situation from different points of view, right? But they're both measuring the same thing. The attending is measuring how much trust it has on the resident, and the resident is measuring how much autonomy is having during this case. Because the resident cannot judge the trust directly. The resident can never know for sure how much that attending trusts them. The only way that they measure trust is indirectly through their autonomy. For example, my son knows how much trust I have in him, depending on how long I let him use the car, or if I let him go on the highway. So he knows that I'm trusting him to do that. He doesn't know my level of trust. He knows his level of autonomy because that's what he's experiencing. So I think if I can make a little suggestion to the American Board of Surgery, just for the purpose of concept, I think that both parties should not be measuring exactly the same thing. The attending should be measuring trust, and the resident should be measuring autonomy. So instead of being a trustability score, instead of being, this is the autonomy score and this is the untrustability score. And I think that the EPA should stand for entrustable professional autonomy, because that defines the role of each of them more clearly. We're not measuring the same thing. I'm measuring my trust, and you're measuring your autonomy. So looking at those numbers, you can find out what type of relationship that person is having. And you know that by the delta. So if there is a bigger difference in perception between the two parties, there has to be a problem in communication. There's something that is not being relied. If I trust you more than what you think I trust you, is because I'm not letting you know how much I trust you. And if I trust you less than what you think you are, you're probably taking more autonomy than what you should. And I'm not letting you know that you have a problem, because otherwise you would stop. So there's a problem in that communication. Now, if you take that and you put it into the whole population, now you can see, is that problem with communication between those two people? Or is there a problem in communication between that person and everybody else? Because if you see that there's big deltas with that particular resident, with all attendings, then you know that the problem is here. There's a problem in communication here. If you see that the problem is with this attending, then the problem is over here. And then you can tackle coaching, right? We're having a problem. There's a problem that all residents think that you are not doing this and that. How can we fix this? How can we make you a better teacher? And the other way around as well. Attendings don't feel that you're listening to them. What is it that we can do to help you learn how to listen better? So I think it's interesting.
That makes a lot of sense. And essentially what it brings is a closed loop via technology, like into the practice of medicine and the teaching of medicine. And definitely as our tools have evolved in surgery, the educational platforms and the way we teach have to also evolve. One thing that I found very interesting about Unira is that you essentially, because of the nature of how the education is, a lot of your procedures are essentially registered on the blockchain. And the whole point of that is to verify them and make sure that it's portable. And more importantly, as a resident, it continues with you at post-training. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I thought that was very interesting.
So the idea behind the blockchain, which we're gearing towards that, is it all came down to me from identity, right? We are our actions. We can say that this is the type of person I am based on the actions that I perform. So I think that a big identity of a surgeon is the type of procedures that they do, right? So when you use the blockchain, you're giving ownership of that information to the owner of that block, right? So let's say if I'm getting all these surgical cases and I stamp them on a blockchain, whoever has that NFT is the owner of that information. And we can track ownership back to where it was minted. So your cases and your activities get linked to you. And now you start to create a real portfolio. And that goes back to my initial idea of creating a portfolio for physicians 20 years ago. And your comment, which is very true, is a lot about timing. Back then, we didn't have that technology. Now we do. Now we can take information, stamp it in a place, and give that information ownership. And I want the doctors to be the owners of their information. The information, their activity has value. And that value has been minted by a lot of industries. The hospital industry, the pharmaceutical, biotech industries, all of them rely on that information that is being generated by doctors. There's a lot of people that benefit from that information. There's a lot of industries that have grown around that information. And everybody's reaping the benefit of that information except the creator of that information, who is the doctor. I think it's not fair. I think that this is our sweat. Being a doctor, being a surgeon is not easy. We have sacrificed a lot. A lot of friends. I made amazing friends inside of med school, and they become your family. Residency, you're broke. All your friends are making a lot of money. You're not making money. You're making below minimum wage in respect of the hours that you work. It's very stressful, residency, but it becomes even more stressful when you finish residency and you're by yourself. And then you go into imposter syndrome. Why is this patient going to come and see me? I just graduated. I know a handful of surgeons that are right next door that have done this procedure so many more times. It's not fair for that person to go and see me. And you have to battle that. You have to battle that. And the way you battle that is by doing it and facing your fears and doing it over and over again and being self-critical and scarring. You get scars in the way all over the place. You get scars that visit you in the middle of the night when you're taking a shower, when you're on vacation with your family. They will come back to say hello and remind you of your mistakes whenever they want, for no apparent reason. And so we sacrifice a lot. And what we do when we do surgery, what we have achieved is ours. That's ours. This is not thanks to anybody else but our own sweat that came out of the sacrifice to our health, to our family, and to our friends. So we should have ownership of that.
I completely agree. And I think that's a really good point and valid. On that same topic, one of the features that you guys released, which I thought was very interesting, is actually one of the things that caught my attention first was the autonomy index that you guys released. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the autonomy index is my incursion into the EPA. So that's why the autonomy part is the part that the residents put. Is the equivalent of entrustability, but in the resident. But one of the things that I told you that I thought was interesting is very intimidating because it grows so fast and you feel that there's so much developing around it that you feel that if you don't get into that bandwagon, if you don't grab a hold of it, the train is going to leave you. So one of the things we did with AI in our software was I was looking into the friction points that residents had when they were logging cases. What is the thing that keeps them from logging cases or making their experience a negative one? And one of the things was finding the CPT code. So the CPT code is a number that identifies a procedure. And that, for example, exploratory laparotomy has a CPT code of 4943, something like that. I don't even remember. So the residents didn't know. They didn't know how to find the codes. They didn't know the keywords to find the codes. So what I did was I fed the CPT code list to, and now the residents don't need to know the name of the procedure exactly, or don't need to know the codes. They can just put something that approximates what they did. Like I remove a colon with my hands. And because it interprets that natural language, it will find the codes that are more relevant to that thing that they said. They can even put the whole operative note, the whole dictation, put it in there, and then the machine, the AI, is going to find the most appropriate codes for that op note. And that is something that we're also giving the attending. You saw, I forgot the CPT code for hiatal hernia repair, and I use it all the time. So for somebody that is doing their own billing, having this easy of use is also beneficial. And that's why that's also included in the attending version of the app. Is that the attending version? No, the attending version is probably going to be out in a couple of weeks, but you never know how it is, how a couple of weeks means in technology. Well,
Oh, totally. And then currently, like, how is he, like, for residents who are listening, they just go to the App Store and download it and start using it? What's the process of just an app using it?
But yeah, so now only surgery residents that are residents in an ACGME accredited program can use the app. The ACGME is the body that is responsible for education, and they all have to register there. And the way that the cases are categorized is something that the ACGME ideated, a gargantuan task that they did. In order for the residents to use the app, they have to have an ACGME account. They download the app, they log in through the app to their ACGME account, and that way we can certify that person is a doctor. We want all of our users to be doctors, and the app will download all the previous cases that they did, categorize them appropriately, and then from that point on, they can use the app for free.
That's fantastic. And I think probably the thing that I like the most about this, Dr. Eckstein, is that it's really closing the loop between attending and residents. And even me, like in medical school, we had this issue where in lecture, is the lecture actually not that good, or were the students not very good? And we always had this issue because it's always a subjective opinion. Like the students are like, the lecture's not very good, that's why we didn't do well on this exam. And the lecturers know I provided all the right information. And that's exacerbated in training. Because at least in a lecture hall, you have quantitative measures, which is the test and everything. But like in training, you don't. So
exactly.
Scope out, let's say 10, 15 years, like what's the big vision that you see for Neera, and like how do you see it potentially influencing like training?
Yeah. So Neera, I see it as a communication channel more than anything else. And also I want to add value to daily activities. So what I want to create is actually a community of physicians that can share their experiences and have a safe place to communicate. Now we have ventured into many channels. We use Facebook and we use LinkedIn and we use WhatsApp or whatever it is. But I don't think that those channels are really tailored to needs. And one of the things that we need is privacy. We need to feel safe to talk. A lot of the times we don't feel safe because we feel that if we talk, we're going to get punished, and either by lawsuits and stuff like that. And so we hold deep inside our problems and we don't like to talk about them. Now, a mix of it has to do with our pride. Nobody likes to have complications, but also has to do with our fears of getting sanctioned for it. Even though we did our best, we're humans. It's funny because my partner always tells this to me. You're a baseball player and they're talking about your batting averages. What is like a very good number for a batting average? Like 4, something like that. Our batting average has to be we have to have nothing less than it's acceptable. And nothing less than in many fronts, because you can do a gallbladder and you can have big complications and you can have little complications. And you have to be perfect in all of them. You're going to have little complications or big complications or any complications because they're all looked into. And I understand, and the quality and all that is important, but we don't have any way out. We don't have no place to talk about that. And I think that creating a community based on those values where people feel safe to talk is one of the things. I talked about the end from here, did not talk about the middle. There's a lot of things in the middle to get from one place to another. But yeah, that's how I see it ultimately.
Yeah, I think it's a great point because surgery especially is very isolating in the sense, like to your point, like you have to be perfect, you have to be great at all these different things. But yet throughout training, it's pretty much been very subjective measures of like how good you are. And then once you're out of training, like really there's no way to monitor it. And again, because of the amount of scrutiny you can fall under from your peers and from patients, a lot of surgeons are self-isolated. So it's very difficult to gauge like, hey, am I actually getting better or or am I getting worse? And I think having those measures also indicate for surgeons when the appropriate time is for them to consider adopting, let's say, new technologies, new techniques, et cetera. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that technology is going to play a bigger and bigger role in our training, and it's in the surgery. It's funny because I'm on a meeting today and I'm talking to one of the vendors and they're vending simulators to train surgeons, right? So they have very fancy simulators, one for catheters and one for laparoscopic surgery, has feedback and haptics and all this stuff. And one of the questions that we had was, okay, we invest in your solution. It costs whatever it costs. What is the longevity of it? How long is my investment for? How long is this going to be around before it becomes obsolete? So the vendor tells me around 10 years. And I'm like, no, because in 10 years, things are going to be so different. The acceleration of change is staggering because all of a sudden, it's like these isolated technologies are coming together and you're being to integrate things that were not communicating before, like the internet with robots and robots with artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence with blockchain and all of that with the real world and sensors. It's just insane that it aggregates and it accelerates the pace of innovation tremendously. So absolutely no way.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's wild to see. Moore's Law is definitely alive and well, but it's amazing to see how fast things are changing and adapting. Dr. Eckstein, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I can't wait to have you back on. But I think it's really great, and I'm excited to see more growth from Unira. I know you guys have social media handles on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram. And for yourself, for those who want to connect and follow you, where's the best place for them to find you?
Send me an email, jeremy@unira.io. That's the best way.
Perfect. Fantastic. For those listening, be sure to go check out Unira. That's UNIRA.io, or check it out in the App Store. I'm your host, Omar Khateeb, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who'd really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.